Now, when it comes to basing, I find that a lot of people like to just throw on some sand and some grass tufts and just call it a day. I don't really agree with this because, in my opinion, basing is one of the three most important decisions you can make when building an army. The first one is the primary colour, in our case the white plate. The second is the secondary colour, which I would say is gold or red. And the third is the choice of basing material, because the base is what really ties the army together. It is the one thing that will look reasonably alike across the entire army. So this is what really ties the theme together. And to be quite frank, when it comes to painting, a really good base is what makes a model. So if you want to really start painting properly and put a lot of effort into a model, then I really suggest that you spend quite a bit of time on the bases as well, because it will really put the dot over the I for the army. Okay, so moving on to basing then. As you can see, I've switched up my usual painting station for just a normal tray, and that's because we'll be dealing with quite a bit of stuff that has a tendency to go everywhere. So what we have here is, to begin with, I have a 50 x 75mm base made out of wood. This is actually developed by a company called Sarissa Precision, and I can highly recommend them. They make some really nice bases and some really nice movement trays, so look them up. For the rest of the base, I of course have a bit here of normal miniature snow. Nice. Yeah, goes everywhere. And this can be bought from anything from Games Workshop to Gale Force 9 to Basecraft. Pretty much everyone has it. Then I'll be using the bark of some pine tree. Of course, depending upon where you live, this may or may not be available. We'll be using this to make a really nice sort of shale stone. So if you have access to it, use it. Otherwise, just use normal shale. I also cut up a piece of old citadel wood, which I hope to can play around with a bit. And for the main basing, I have this sort of greyish, reasonably fine sand that we're going to use. I'm not sure where I got this from, unfortunately, so can't give you any tips there. And then I have some tundra tuft from Army Painter, which gives us some really nice wintry grass. And I'm not quite sure where I got these, but they're sort of icicles that we're going to add to the base for some really nice effect. And the glue we're going to use is PVA glue, developed by Games Workshop. It works really nice for constructing bases. But before we go any further, I kind of want to protect this model so I don't have to be going around and brushing up on the paint as I scuff it when I handle it, partly now and later on when I'm wargaming. So to begin with, I am going to be gluing the model to this base, and then I'm going to give it a quick spray of this called acrylic matte varnish, which produces a thin protective layer over the model and protects the paint from being damaged. So let's start by doing that, and then we'll start doing the basing. Okay, now to start off with, we're going to have a look at this pine bark. Now the natural structure of pine bark means that it looks oddly like slate in how it's built, with loads of different layers. So this is why we're going to use this for our rocky outcroppings. Now it's pretty straightforward to get this into the size you want. It's pretty much just break them by hand until you get sort of pieces you like. I've already prepared a few pieces that I quite like, so we're going to be working on these. To start off with, since they're filled with sort of bits and pieces of dirt and such from being outside, just take a nice white brush and just give them a brushing down to remove any particles and bits and pieces of lichen or whatever might be stuck on them. There we go. And also remove parts that don't seem to be sort of sitting too securely on the bark, since you don't want any pieces to be falling off mid-game. There we go. Next we are actually going to have to do some more painting, but this painting is quite rough in how we're going to do it, so you don't need this is not delicate work. Anyone can do this, so I'm just going to tidy up our tray a bit. There we go. To start off with, we're going to take a really quite a rough brush, and we are going to base coat these pieces of bark in something called Mechanicus Standard Grey. And this is quite a dark grey, so it makes for a good base for rocky colours. So we're just going to take a bit of that, get a good measure on the brush, and just run it all over. And this sort of rough texture of the bark gives this a really nice, like a consistency of a rough stone. So, I've base coated the pieces of bark in the base coat of whatever it is, Mechanicus Standard Grey. And as you can see, they're looking quite a bit like rocks already. What we are going to do now, however, is to take the same rough brush and apply a quick coat of Nuln Oil. And this will really start to give the effect of stone, since there are so many recesses in this bark, so this oil will have quite a big effect. But as with before, it's really important, especially here, that you don't over wash it, or else it'll start to look a bit greasy instead of rock-like. So keep control of your paint and make sure the wash doesn't pool excessively. So the wash has dried, and as you can see, we are starting to get some nice rocky feel to these pieces of bark. To complete this, we are going to apply 2 layers of dry brushing. To begin with, we are going to apply Dawnstone, which is a lighter grey than the one we used to base with, and dry brushing for... Wow, who the hell glued this thing on? There we go. And there we go. Get a nice piece of paper here. And go, and then work the colour in among the bristles. There we go. And then just run the brush all over the, well, call it a rock from now on. And since this bark has so many nooks and crannies, the dry brush will really pick out all the raised points, which will give it a really nice rocky effect. Do a bit more. There we go. So for the second layer of dry brush, we are going to use a much lighter grey called Administratum Grey. and this dry brush is going to be a lot lighter than the previous one, so we're just going to take some colour there. Again, work it in among the bristles. Remember, when you wash your brush in between switching colours, make sure that the brush is nice and dry. It's especially important when you use dry brush, otherwise if you get water then the colour will smear, which will ruin the effect. So with this dry brush we want to be a bit more light-handed, so just don't apply too much pressure, just run it all over there lightly, and especially among all the particularly raised points. There we go. Got rid of a bit too much colour. And there we go, a nice piece of rock made from bark. So now you can just finish the other piece, and then it's time to glue it to the base. Okay, so I've taken the liberty of gluing a couple of things to the base here, and I do this off screen because, quite frankly, if you've been watching for so long and still don't know how glue works, then go away. So what I've done is I've glued the rocks or pieces of bark to the base, and I've also painted the branch of citadel wood in dark brown with a bit of dry brushing to sort of match the whole dead wood winter theme. And then, as you can see, I've added quite a few icicles to the base and the tree all over here. So now it's time to start working on the proper base material, and for this we'll be using that dark sand, and in complete violation of everything I just said, I'm now going to show you how glue works. So we'll be using PVA glue, which is stated quite good for this, and we're going to, let's see, just put up a large dollop there, and I'll be using a sculpting tool to add this to the base. So, and even though we'll want some snow on this base later on, we still will be covering the entire base with this sand, because you want the snow to, you want it to give the illusion that it's lying on top of the ground rather than to the side of it. So this is fairly straightforward. Just, you can do this with a toothpick or whatever. It's just, I just like using this tool and just smear it all over the base like so. And there we go. The entire base has been covered with a reasonably thick layer of PVA glue. And what you do now is quite straightforward. Take your tub of basing material and you place the model in it. And then I suggest you just tilt it back and forth to make sure that the basing material covers every nook and cranny of the base, because there's a lot of sort of rocks and well, there we go. So yeah, there are a lot of you want it to get right up into the cracks and such underneath the rocks. So there we go, and I'm going to leave that in there until it dries. And for this next part, you quite frankly leave it to dry for quite a bit, because the PVA glue needs to be perfectly dry for this next part, otherwise you'll mess up the entire basing. So just leave it to dry for a good old time, and then we'll come back to it. So with the PVA glue dried up, most people would perhaps leave the sand like this, since it covers the base and it has the right colour and everything else. I would actually advise against this, because what it looks like now is it looks like sand covering the base of a miniature. There's no depth, there's no sort of 3D effect to this sand, it is just flat. And the thing you need to think about is that since this is a miniature, this sand does not actually represent sand, but rather, if you scale it down or scale it up or whatever you want to call it, it should be like small rocks or pebbles on the ground. And because of this, we want to give it the illusion of being smaller rocks rather than just flat sand. So we're actually going to paint this sand a bit. And to start with, to give it the 3D effect, we're going to wash the entire base in trusty Northern oil. And then we are going to, just as with the bark rocks, we are going to add 2 layers of dry brush. So just take a bit of wash and just slather it on here. Now you might notice that there are sort of bright lines along the edge here, that where the colour of the base underneath sort of shows through, but we're going to take care of that the last thing we do. You'll need quite a bit of wash to go over the base, since this sand eats wash like nothing else. So yeah, if you use this technique, you'll most likely spend more wash on bases than you ever will on actual models. But again, the effect is worth it. So yeah. And with the wash dried, you can see that we've already got a little bit of a more pronounced 3D effect to the sand. And the only thing that is required to do to finish off that is to dry brush it. And we're going to dry brush this in the exact same manner as I dry brushed the rocks, with first with a layer of Dawnstone, followed by a layer of Administratum Grey. Now I'll take care of this off screen, because quite frankly it's boring to watch dry brushing. So I'll take care of that on screen, and then I'll see you back and we can start to work on the snow. So with the dry brushing of the gravel done, you can see that it's attained pretty much the same kind of colour as the rocks, which is kind of what we're going for, since the gravel should look like eroded pieces of the bedrock that this stone is made of. So now it's time to move on to the snow, and there's a little bit of a trick to this. Some might just put on PVA glue on the base and then sprinkle the snow on top. I say don't do this. Instead, there's a bit of a trick to applying good snow. Because snow, unlike sort of gravel and grass and stuff and such, doesn't lie flat on the base. Rather, it has volume. So what we're going to do is get a bit of this PVA glue, just quite a big dollop, and then we will add some of this. Oh, that was useless. We will add this snow on top. Let's start with that. Yeah, make sure you sort of keep control of this snow stuff, otherwise it will end up pretty much anywhere. And then we'll take a toothpick and just mix this together. There we go. And the consistency we're looking for here is sort of a bit like toothpaste. So you might have to add quite a bit. You don't want far too much, or else it'll get really gloopy and hard to apply, and it won't look realistic when it dries. but you still want quite a bit. And yeah, that might be a bit too much. Yeah, that was too much. So I had to add a bit more of this. There we go. And what this does is when PVA glue dries, it sort of it pulls together, which means that any volume you might have while you were gluing suddenly disappears. And by mixing this snow stuff in with the PVA glue, you will retain a certain amount of its volume, which it will get you that sort of nice thick snow effect. I'll just brush off my hands a bit. Now we want to apply this. So just take any kind of tool you seem deem adequate for the task. I'll just use a sculpting tool. And then take off up a bit of this smeared mass and just lay it on top. And try not to make sort of the dollops round like I've done here. I'm just going to add a bit more to make it far more irregular. It makes it look far more realistic. There we go, like that. Yeah, there we go. Now to finish this off, when this dries it will just produce a hard surface, which is not what we want. We want it to still have that powdery look to it. And what we're going to do then is take a little bit more of this snow and then just sprinkle it on top. You can add quite a bit of excess because you'll just be able to brush the rest away later. So, as so, and then we can remove what we don't want by just tapping the model slightly. Now there's still plenty of sort of snow particles on there and around there, but we'll just, once everything has dried, we'll just be brushing that away with a paintbrush. So that is how you do snow. And there he is, with the snow applied. This base is almost complete. So we're going to finish it off by adding some tufts, or turf tufts, or whatever they're called these days. These are sort of small tufts of fabric, or whatever they're made out of. With bits and pieces of the same sort of snowy material we've used for the snow within them, which gives them the look of sort of dried long grass with pieces of snow still caught in them. So this is fairly straightforward. We're just going to use a little bit of PVA glue, like so. That's a bit much even. And then just use a pair of tweezers and dip the underside in a bit of glue, like so. And then just attach it to the base. Like so. So yeah, just need to apply this grass, and then this will be finished. And there he is. The Varanguard is finished in all his glory. and I will allow you to have a closer look at him in a few moments to have a look at the fruits of our labour. And oh yeah, by the way, don't mind the cat, he's fine. But yeah, so the finishing words I can say on this project is that it took quite a bit longer than I had expected it to. There's a lot of fine detail on this model and it's bloody huge. So yep, but I'm incredibly pleased with the results, and he's ready to take to the battlefield and kill kittens and puppies in no time. So what can I say to finish off this project? I don't know, not really anything I haven't already said. So to all of you would-be painters, good luck out there, and remember, skill is it all comes from patience. If you have enough patience, then you can make your army look any way you want. So with that, good luck and happy painting.